Okay, hello, good evening. So today we have, it's our honor to have an invited speaker, Dr. Howard Chang. He was our PhD graduate and he has a lot of experience in carbon footprint assessment. And now he has his own company about carbon assessment. And yeah, so today it is our honor to have him here to talk about building carbon footprint assessment. So please give him a big hand.
Thank you very much, Hilda. And good evening, everyone. As Hilda introduced, I'm Howard, and now I have my own company called the Piro Company, and I used to do research R&D at not just Polytechnic University, but also for startups and also for National Laboratory in the US. And after that, I joined the industry for consultancy work related to carbon assessment, energy efficiency, different types of engineering work. And then during that period, I have published more than 40 different publications together with 600 different large or small scale projects in consultancy. And with all those experience, now now I am kind of confident, you can say, to introduce to you what Hong Kong is doing, what the Hong Kong industry and the government are doing with carbon assessment for buildings in Hong Kong. So I know that most of you probably before this lecture have already been introduced with different types of calculation procedures, theoretical runs, industry runs. Hilda has already introduced all those calculation procedures with you or to you, but you may wonder, hey, are there any what are the actual practices in Hong Kong that you would need to use those knowledge on? Well, because those calculations, some of those, if you look at those standards and also textbooks, you may find a lot of them they don't really come from local standards, but rather something from other places around the world. You may not be able to see a lot of those drivers in Hong Kong, even if you see all those marketing brochures out there or advertisement out there. You may wonder how the industry in Hong Kong is actually driving the low carbon practices through different types of carbon assessment. Of course, there are different things like carbon neutrality or also carbon offset, things like that. But today, I would like to focus on the local building reporting on greenhouse gases emissions in Hong Kong, okay? Just the local building practices, not other things around in other parts of the world. Not only that, but I will also focus on the non-technical parts, how the industry or the buildings in Hong Kong engage with each other, and what are the procedures involved during those engagement in order for these carbon audits to happen for buildings in Hong Kong, okay? This is the agenda for today's presentation, my presentation. So first of all, I will talk about why do we do carbon audits or local building reporting on greenhouse gas emissions in Hong Kong. And after that, I will talk about where are we doing it. So you can see a lot of buildings in Hong Kong, right? We have 60,000, around 60,000 buildings in Hong Kong. But, well, you may not see the practice in all the buildings in Hong Kong. Sometimes maybe you wonder, hey, I'm living in some housing estates built by the Hong Kong government. Are we doing that? I can't even see those announcements by the building management. So where are we doing it? I will explain that. And after that, I will focus on talking about not the technical parts of the work of the carbon audits in Hong Kong, but rather the project management part. How do we start and how do we end a project in carbon audit in Hong Kong? Okay, yeah, it's not. I know that you have already covered all the technical parts, but what are we doing? What the industry and the government are doing in Hong Kong, such that you will need those knowledge, you will need to do those calculations. I will talk about that, and then at the end of the presentation, I will talk about some of the emerging trends. Not those ones that we are practicing, but the ones that we will see, that the industry or the government are discussing, such that we may see them in the near future. Okay, and I hope that, well, after today's presentation, well, I will cover quite a lot of things, and I know that you won't be able to remember everything, but I do hope that you'll be able to describe why the significance of doing carbon audits in Hong Kong, and what are the non-technical workflow that you would encounter if you are doing such carbon audits in Hong Kong. And finally, what are the emerging trends in the industry that you will see in the near future? Okay, so first of all, why do we need carbon audits in Hong Kong? Before I move on to talk about the industry motivations and initiatives, maybe can one of you tell me, why do we need carbon audits in Hong Kong? Why do we need it in buildings in Hong Kong? Why do we need to do that? Anyone? No? The later case. Why do we need to reduce the carbon in buildings in Hong Kong? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. Yep, that's correct. So the existing buildings in Hong Kong, unlike the new buildings which are being built with new building standards, new low carbon building standards, they release a lot of carbon emissions in Hong Kong. Okay, you can't really change their design to reduce their electricity consumption. They may even have some fossil fuel generators or boilers inside that you can't switch, such that whenever they operate, they will generate a lot of carbon emission, and you need to have some ways to quantify the amount of carbon emitted by these building operations before you can tell them, hey, you are doing something really impactful to the environment in Hong Kong or in the world. You need to reduce it, okay? Yeah, if you don't start doing the quantification, nobody will believe that those old buildings are really releasing a lot of carbon, and then they won't do anything to reduce their impact. But let's move back up a little bit to the global impact first. So the reason why we need to look at carbon emission and also in buildings is that we have climate change. Okay, so yeah. It's just like when you look at it's similar to those safety rules out there. So if you are releasing a very small amount of carbon such that you are not changing the world, then even if the chemical itself is very toxic, you may not be aware of it. But right now, we are releasing a lot of greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. So if you look at the diagram on the left, this is a simulation study from IPCC. You will see that the temperature rise grow in the world on the Earth is mainly driven by the man-made by the greenhouse gas emission of man-made activities. The green line shows those temperature change resulted from the greenhouse gas concentration changes in by the natural environment, and the brown line shows the temperature change as a result of the man-made activities. And you can see that this is much higher than the green line, showing that we are the reason of the temperature change, of the temperature increase. And temperature increase doesn't just make it hotter. If you look at the other diagram at the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that it's driving a much more variation in the climate around the world. We have more droughts, we have more precipitation as well. So in some cases, like if you look at the study from CDD in Hong Kong on the top, they have identified more and more locations with flooding, with higher and higher flooding risk. So those locations, they include some of those expensive real estates, and yeah, that affects the property prices and also the what engineers need to do in some of the in the construction in some of those areas, or refurbishment. It's not just about new construction, but the existing buildings over there as well. And not just for the cities, but droughts, for example, droughts and flooding in rural areas. What do they mean? They mean loss of agricultural products. You can't grow so much food anymore. So the food supply is actually being limited by the greenhouse gas emission, and it's not a good thing either. And they are also, and droughts doesn't just kill the plants. If you look at the figures on the right, you can see that it's causing wildfires, it's causing a lot more natural hazards that would affect our livelihood immediately. So, well, it's a risk, it's dangerous, and we need to fix it. And because of that, a lot of nations in the world have already committed to carbon neutrality. They have committed to reduce the carbon emission of those of their own nations. And if you look at the diagram on the left, you can see that a lot of those carbon emission is resulted from energy consumption in different sectors. Around 75% come from energy consumption. You can see that the greenhouse gas emission. And if you look at the situation in Hong Kong, which the government has also done the same commitment, most of our greenhouse gas emission actually comes from buildings, right? Because in Hong Kong, we don't have much agricultural products. We don't have much industrial activities either. So most of those greenhouse gas emissions in Hong Kong, they come from building operations and building construction. So that's why we, for Hong Kong to reach carbon neutrality, like what we committed, we need to focus on carbon emission reduction in buildings, okay? We need to focus on carbon emission reduction in buildings. And from that perspective, we are not just talking about the government. The industry and also other non-building sectors have also committed to do different things to reduce the carbon emission in Hong Kong. If, for example, you look at the left, BEAM plus existing buildings, we have green building certification standards or guidelines, I should say it this way, that would encourage people and give guidelines to people on how they can reduce the greenhouse gas emission in Hong Kong. And if you look at the figure in the center, it's a government, it's a environmental report from the Hong Kong Post, a government department. Yeah, they are also committed to they are also committed to reduce carbon emission, such that they now need to report how much carbon they have emitted and they have reduced every year. So that's why you can see that they are doing things, and they are doing things like they are starting it by doing carbon audits in buildings, which is what we are going to discuss today. Okay. So, and the BREEAM Plus existing buildings actually also requires carbon audit. Or I won't say requirement, but it also encourages people such that if you do one in your building, you will show that you are disclosing and investigating how much carbon you're emitting. You can get a credit, which would help you to get some higher ratings of your in your buildings. And on the right, you can see that we are not just talking about the government and the building industry. Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which regulates the banks in Hong Kong, is also asking the banks in Hong Kong to reach operational carbon neutrality by 2030. And what does it mean? It means that they need to limit the carbon emission of their offices, of their buildings in Hong Kong by 2030. So we are not just talking about the regulations or the encouragement from the building sectors or the government. The long buildings industries, like the banking, the financing industry, is also doing things to reduce carbon emission in buildings in Hong Kong. And the first way to do it is to know how much you are emitting, right? So that's why we need carbon audits in Hong Kong. And just now I showed you the environmental report, right? So if you look into the motivation behind the report, actually it's from the Climate Action Plan 2050, the Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan in 2050, and it's together with the 2024 policy address. It asks the Hong Kong government buildings to do annual carbon audits in their major buildings and report how much carbon emission they have resulted and they have reduced every year. And there are key performance indicators on those buildings to reduce their carbon emission. So that's why the government buildings, they are not just doing carbon audits to know how much carbon they are emitting, but they are also trying to find ways. They are finding ways to reduce their carbon emission. And it's not just Hong Kong Post. You can see on the right, bottom right-hand side, you can see the environmental report of the other department, the LCSD department, which is doing similar things. And just now I said that we have encouragement from the building sectors to do carbon audits and reduce carbon emission. So if you look deeper into the BREEAM Plus existing building certification scheme, you can see that we have multiple credits, not just one, but multiple credits, which ask building operators to look at their building operation carefully with energy audits or carbon audits to know their carbon emission, that are not just the total, okay, not just the total carbon emission, but also the different end users. What is the operation that will result in the most carbon emission in their buildings, and how are you going to reduce it? They are asking this question, and if you disclose it, you can get some marks which will help you to get better ratings in those building certification schemes. So that's why we have, and you can see on the top right-hand side, we have all those different ratings, okay? We have all those different ratings from BREEAM Plus existing buildings. And with those ratings, the building owners may be able to get better green financing from some green financing schemes. So people are being encouraged to do carbon audits in their buildings and reduce their carbon emission. And just now I mentioned that the government is encouraging their own buildings to do carbon audits. And the building sectors are also encouraging different facility management to do carbon audits. But I also mentioned that the banks, right, they are being forced to do carbon audits as well. And actually, it's not just the banks. If you look at the regulations from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, in order to be an unlisted company, you need to disclose your carbon emission as well. For you doing by carbon audits. Of course, we are not talking about carbon audits in buildings. We are talking about carbon audit in at the company level. But in order to for some of those unlisted companies, well, if they own a building or two or so, they still need to do carbon audits in buildings to have those numbers of carbon emission of the entire company at the end. So that's why we have other non-building sectors encouraging carbon emission disclosure. And you can actually look at the right-hand side. This is one of the extracted parts from one of those annual reports of unlisted companies. You can see very detailed scope 1, 2, 3 emission details that they are disclosing to the public. And they are also disclosing what they would do to further limit their carbon emission in the future. And finally, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, they are asking our banks to reach operational net zero by 2030. So, in order to prove that they have done it under the regulation of Hong Kong Monetary Authority, they need to do carbon audits at the company level, or should I say it this way, do the carbon audits at their buildings in order to find different engineering recommendations to limit their carbon emission and to prove that they have reached net zero or carbon neutrality by 2030. And in some cases, we are not just talking about buildings and companies. We are even talking about events, okay? We are talking about events. So if you look at this extract of tender notice or tender award notice from the government, you can see that they have the government is asking some company to perform carbon neutrality services for the national games that are being conducted in Hong Kong right now. Carbon neutrality services for events. That's what's happening. That's what's happening as well. The government is asking some contractors to do the carbon audits for the entire event to calculate the amount of greenhouse gas emission as a result of running the national game, and how they are going to reduce the carbon emission of the event to net zero, such that they will be able to prove that they have reduced. They have a green event, should I say it this way, a green event in Hong Kong. So we are not just talking about buildings, we are talking about companies and even events, large-scale events as well, when we are talking about carbon audits. But having said that, we have seen so many different drivers for and also so many different practices for carbon audits and to lower carbon emission. Let's go back to the topic of the day, carbon audits in buildings in Hong Kong. So just now I said that we have 60,000 different buildings in Hong Kong, right? And you have also seen different motivations and different ways of the government, of the building sectors, and also the non-building sectors to encourage people to do carbon audits and to reduce the carbon emission. But where are we doing it? Yeah, because as I mentioned, if you go back to where you live, you go to look at the announcement board from the facility management over there, you would never see something like carbon audit reports or carbon emission reporting, right? Most of the time. You may see that more often these days, but most of the time you won't be able to see it. So where are we doing it? Where are we doing carbon audits in Hong Kong? I've mentioned government buildings, right? From the environmental reports of the departments, but what else? Where will you see such things happening in your daily life? Of course, you can see all those, just now I've mentioned a lot of those different things from government announcement. But in your daily life, where or during your, on your job, where will you see these things happening? Anyone? Well, just now I mentioned the drivers from Hong Kong Stock Exchange and Hong Kong Monetary Authority, right? So yeah, actually, most of the time it's in Hong Kong. I know that in mainland China, most of the time you will see power plants doing carbon audits because they need to prove that they are reducing the carbon emission. And of course, in Hong Kong, our power plants are also doing carbon audits, but we only have less than 5 power plants in Hong Kong, okay? So we are not going to talk about that today, but rather we are going to talk about carbon audits in banks and also in offices, buildings in Hong Kong. And of course, we have some factories outside Hong Kong which are owned by companies in Hong Kong, which they will also need to do carbon audits following the guidelines in mainland China. But in today's presentation, I'm going to focus on the practice performed following this guideline from Hong Kong government, the guidelines to account for and report on greenhouse gas emissions and removals for buildings, commercial, residential, or institutional purposes in Hong Kong. Well, I know if you look at the year of the guideline, it's old. In these 15 years, we have a lot of improvements and also different types of work to improve the practices and accuracy of carbon audits around the world. But the Hong Kong government, even with all those motivations and also regulations, we haven't updated our guidelines since 2010. So today, let's look at the guideline, the practice of the guideline in more details. Having said, yeah, and you can see that even though our green building certification scheme, the BEAM Plus, they have revised quite a lot since 2010. But if you look at the carbon audits being practiced inside, we are still following that guideline. Okay, the 2010 guideline, and if you and the BEAM Plus existing building certificate itself, most of the time it's the shopping malls that are applying for it. Okay, the BEAM Plus existing building certificate, most of the time it's the shopping mall that is applying for the certificate. So that's why, in addition to banks and office buildings in Hong Kong, we are also seeing a lot of shopping malls trying to do the carbon audits in Hong Kong, following the said guideline, all right? And finally, because the government is asking all government buildings, right, to do the carbon audits. So of course, whenever we are talking about carbon audits of buildings in Hong Kong, we can't miss that. We have government buildings doing carbon audits in Hong Kong, and they actually, from their perspective, from the government perspective, they are not limiting the carbon audit practices in offices, in their office buildings only. As far as it's a large building, they will do it. For example, those buildings with wet markets, with markets selling vegetables, selling seafood, selling meat, those buildings, they have done carbon audits every year. And similarly, even in the stadiums, the Kaita Stadium, they probably have done it as well. And other municipal buildings, those buildings with sport halls or other activity rooms, they have done carbon audits inside as well, as far as they are a few stories tall. And actually, sometimes even for those food courts with only which occupies some parts of the private buildings, they are also asking contractors or consultants out there to help the government to do carbon audits in those parts of the buildings. It's like, yeah, even if it's as small as, I think, 800 square meters, it's not that big. They are still asking contractors or consultants to help them to do carbon audits in those limited areas. And of course, finally, the landfills in Hong Kong. I haven't done that one, but I know that the Hong Kong government also need to know how much greenhouse gas is being emitted in the landfills as well. You can see from the chart on the right, actually around 10% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from waste, which means the methane being emitted by the decomposition of waste from landfill. So yeah, that's significant as well, and I know that they are doing it every year too. So, well, we are following an old guideline to do the carbon audits, and excuse me. We are following an old guideline to do carbon audits, and we are not doing it everywhere. We are doing it in office buildings, shopping malls, and also bank buildings. But how do we do it? How do we actually do it? How do the two parties engage with each other to do it? I mean, most of the time, for carbon audit jobs in Hong Kong, the building owners, they want their carbon audit report to be trusted, because at the end of the day, they need to disclose it to the public, like the Hong Kong government environmental, the Hong Kong government department's environmental reports, or the stock exchange reports from all those different unlisted companies. They need to disclose it to the public, and to do so, to have their reports to be trusted, they can't just ask somebody in their original and in their organization to do it and publish it, because in that case the reports will not be so much trust. So, and it's not related to their core business as well. So most of the time, even for the case I talked about just now, the 800 square meter wet market carbon audits, they will ask others to do it for them. They will ask contractors and consultants outside to do it for them. But so in terms of the timeline, in terms of the if we include all those commercial engagement, how are we doing carbon audits in Hong Kong? I know that Hilda has already talked about all those technical details, so today I will focus on this part instead of all those technical things. And as I mentioned, the guideline is old. It's already 15 years old, and they are still not updating it. And because of that, the practice, actually the engagement method itself, is kind of, I would say, people have practiced it a lot. So you can generalize the whole practice into a project cycle in this way. So yeah, you before this lecture, you probably have already known how the guidelines or similar guidelines on carbon audits are being practiced, starting from the request for information part. So you know that you need to collect a lot of different information related to carbon emission before doing it, right? But before that, in the real world, in the actual society, in order for two parties to engage with each other and to practice carbon audits, things start before that. Things start way before the request for information. So before the project begins, actually we have two more phases. I would say that we have two more phases. The first one is the communication from clients. Sadly, it doesn't always happen. And also the request for NF, which will be followed or begun by the request for quotation, or I would say RFQs for short, or tender notices. So it's a business process for two parties to start to engage with each other, okay? Oh, by the way, first of all, before I continue, let me ask, how many of you have helped your employer or help your own company to issue quotations, or have issued requests for quotations to your suppliers? If you have done it, raise up your hand, please, or help to reply tenders for your employer. How many of you have done that? Okay. Well, actually, I would say that stage, the second part, will be the most exciting part or the busiest part in the whole project cycle. Anyway, I will talk about that later. But after that phase, the project will begin. Okay, the project will begin, and we will have you will see all those steps that are really similar to ordinary carbon audit processes, from request for information, initial desktop analysis, kick-off meetings and site visits, desktop analysis for initial drafting of the report, iteration with the client, and finalization of the report. Okay, and that will probably, technically speaking, finish the whole carbon audit practice. Okay, technically speaking. Having said that, we may still have potential follow-up. Well, that's unlikely, but it did happen to me in all those different projects. Not always, but yeah, when it happened, it's not fun, I would say. But it would happen. So I will talk about what would be there today, okay? So, first of all, let's start with the communication of from the clients. A client, because of all different reasons, Green Plus certification requirements, government initiatives, Hong Kong Stock Exchange requirements in annual reports, or Hong Kong Monetary Authority requirements, they may be asked to by their employer or other schemes to say, hey, you need to do a carbon audit, okay? And then in that case, because as I mentioned, at the end of the day, they can't just publish their own carbon audit reports. They need to find professionals to endorse it. And it will be better for them to find others to do it for them, so that their reports can be more easily trusted later on. Okay, more easily trusted by others later on. So they need to find others to help them doing it. So they will call those facility managers. Will call different surface suppliers, different carbon auditors, saying, hey, can you help me to do it? That's the start, for me, that's the start of a potential carbon audit project, okay? So we start by some communication from the client, say, hey, we need to do something related to carbon audit. Okay, how can we help? How can we help you? Okay, so in most of the cases, it's straightforward. They would just ask for carbon accounting. So, okay, yeah, let's follow the guideline, okay? And then our service includes things like, yeah. But in some cases, like for example, for requirements according to the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, they may want, the bank may want something more than just carbon accounting, more than just carbon audit. They may want you to help them to reduce the carbon emission in the bank together with the carbon audit project, okay? So they will ask for more things, and sometimes they may ask for, hey, can you help me to prove that our bank will reach carbon neutrality in 2030? Well, yeah, I know that's kind of aggressive, but they will ask things like that. So that actually means that you have more projects inside their request beyond carbon accounting. So you need to be careful with that. And sometimes they may, if your service can include that, then you need to think, hey, what are we going to do such that we need to do beyond carbon audit to help them? So things like carbon credit retirement or engineering work to retrofit their buildings in order to help them to reduce their carbon emission. They may be asking for that as well, and you may want to include that in your service as well. So at that stage, you may try to shake the surface, and in some cases, even though the project is still a potential project, it's not finalized yet, you may want to pay them a visit to discuss, like a sales engineer, to discuss with them what they really want and how you can help them. So the first thing to finalize is what type of services you are going to provide to them, okay? And of course, different standards would require different types of professionals, and different types of service will require different types of professionals. For carbon audits, of course, carbon auditors in Hong Kong, right? But then if we are talking about retrofits of the building to reduce carbon emission, then we may need to have a registered professional engineer to help. So you may have different types of professionals in the service, and you need to include or exclude that. And sometimes they may ask for more things beyond that, like engineering designs, or even the supply of equipment to help them to reduce the carbon emission. You need to make sure that you have those excluded. If you have forgotten to exclude that when you begin the offer of the service, they may ask for that at the end, and because you can't charge them, and you have forgotten to exclude that, you can't charge them separately for that job, and you will lose money for that job. And commercially speaking, let's just say that's bad. You don't want that, okay? That's bad. You don't want to offer extra service that you don't have money to do, okay? So commercially speaking, so that's why you need to make sure that what you are including or excluding in that service. That's the important part that you need to pay attention to when you talk to your client. And of course, during that part, you may want to try to do budgeting as well. Carbon audits, most of the time, the budget would depend on the size of the building. The larger the building, the more things that you need to cover, and the higher the price. And for some of the clients, depending on the price of the service, they may need to have different commercial procedures to engage you. Sometimes they may need to use open tender in the most serious case, or sometimes they may just need to find 3 suppliers separately and then to justify the service. So they need to know the approximate price before they are doing things. For example, for government officials, for some departments, I'm not talking about all departments, but for some departments, their engagement methods for services below $50,000 Hong Kong dollars and higher than $50,000 may differ a lot. And they need to know how to engage you officially. So they want the budgeting of the project. And you may want to give them or not give them, then it's up to the company culture, all right? But then the client may ask for budgeting and approximate budgeting, and you may want to give it to them. And sometimes the client, because they know nothing about carbon audits, even though it's already a 15-year-old guideline, sometimes he or she may be new to the idea, and he or she may not, like for example, the facility manager comes from the residential sector, and he or she may not be familiar with the practices that are being done in commercial buildings. Okay, so the client may know nothing about carbon audits or what they are expecting from your service. So they may ask for sample deliverables as well during the communication stage. And in that case, in some scenarios, they may even want to request for a business quotation with technical specification directly. So depending on your company culture or practices, you may or may not want to give it to them. So there are lots of different variations in this stage because of the requirements on the client side and the requirements on your side as well. But without this stage, most of the time, you won't see a carbon audit you won't have the project at all, because the two engagement parties, they do not know what each other wants, and at the end of the day, they can't engage. And this process, it may range from a week to up to 6 weeks or 6 months or even more, depending on what type of services that they really want. Sometimes they may think, okay, let's just have a carbon audit service. But then maybe a month later, after their own internal meeting, they may think that, okay, maybe we want more than that. We want to have carbon neutrality, or maybe they want you to try to include third-party verification of the carbon audit reports. And yeah, things would change dramatically. So this phase of the work may range from 1 week to something like 6 months. So yeah, and I would say even at this stage, I still find this phase to be hard to control and manage depending on the client. It's definitely not technical and it's not easy. You may not want to leak everything to the client because at this stage, you still have some other competitors, which I would talk about at the next stage, the RFQ or tender notice stage. So during this stage, the client, they sort of know what they want, okay? And they have finally written a formal request to not just you, okay, but to your competitors as well to bid for the project. They will send you and your competitors a request for quotation or a tender notice to ask you to reply with a detailed budget, with some other details to bid for this job. And in a lot of scenarios, if the job is simple, usually the person with the lowest prices wins. The lowest price wins, okay? And so even with all those work during the communication from client stage, if your price is not the lowest, after this stage, you may still lose the bid and your project won't realize it may be done by the other competitor. So that's why I just said that you may not want to give all the information to your clients because it's still not an actual job. It may take too much time from you, and maybe at the end some other people will follow up your work and you won't get even $1 from it. And so that's why I said that during that previous stage, it's really hard to finalize the project at the end. You still don't know if you have the project, okay? And okay, let's continue. And before I talk about this phase, I said that this is the most exciting part, okay? Because usually for engineering projects, even for reports, okay, you would think, hey, it's a report, right? Academic reports may be a piece of homework. You can, even for some simple exercises, you may have more than 2 weeks to finish it. You will know that way in advance. But this thing, RFQ tender notice, including getting permissions from your company to issue one because of the pricing or things like that for quality control, etc. Usually, the client will only ask, would limit the time to return to time to reply in 5 working days. 5 working days. Most of the time, just a week. And this also includes the time which they send you the request for quotation and tender by post. Not email, okay, by post. So the worst case I've seen, they send the request for quotation by post because of some old practices. And it took 2 days for it to arrive at my office. And it says that I need to submit it back by Friday. And most of my team were going to be off on the next 2 days. Things happen like that. So that's why I said this stage is usually the most exciting part. So during this stage, you need to finish all the things that I'm going to talk about. But before that, I need to mention this part. During this stage, request for quotation and tender notice stage, things are official, right? Official. It's no longer something like an official communication with the clients, things like that. The client's service requirements, their service requirements are fixed at this stage. And not just that, but all communication, because you are competing with other competitors in the market during this stage. all contacts with the clients must be on record, must be official. You need to send, you may need to send your questions regarding the tender notice or request for quotation, not just by calling, but by post or by email. And they will need to reply it to you with some other quality control processes, with some other approvals in their departments. And you need to go through all those things. You can't just call and then ask a question and get an answer immediately. Things are official, or otherwise, if they are not official, if they have something being passed to you under the table, then they are giving you more information than what they are giving to the competitors. Okay? Then what does that mean? Well, you do remember that I said things are official? So in this stage, if they are giving you more information than what they are giving to the other competitors, actually that implies corruption. ICAC can come to you. So during this stage, everything must be official, and the communication stuff, they are getting very, very slow. But at the same time, you only have 5 working days before you can reply the tender, or reply them an official quotation. So yep, at this stage, things are exciting, and yeah, things are hard too. Having said that, in some scenarios, they will still, because some of the competitors actually, it may be their first, they may not have that communication stage. It may be their first time receiving this job request. So at this stage, they may still have a site visit for you during these 5 working days. They may still have a site visit for you that will welcome all competitors. So during that stage, depending on how much you have prepared, how well you understand their request, you may still want to go to that site visit. And during this stage, even though the request for quotation or the tender notice may include all the information related to their technical specification, like the one on the right, you can see this is the tender notification from EMSD for a carbon audit job. This is just an example, one of their previous tender notices. You still want to submit your own technical proposal or your own technical specification, saying what you are going to do with according to their job. It shows not only your understanding to their proposal, to their job request, but also it will become a part of the contract when you win the bid. Okay, so that's why you need to have a detailed technical specification, and also inclusion or exclusion on what you are offering or not offering, to let it become part of the contract at the end of the day. So during the communication stage, I said there may be a lot of variation of different service requests, right? But at this stage, most of the time, things are fixed. Whatever you are writing inside your technical specification is going to happen. You can't change it. That will be part of the contract. So things are serious, and you need to be careful with that. And during this stage, actually, sometimes things may not go so smoothly. You may finally realize something off from their request for quotation. For example, you may say that, oh, I just have manpower to, at this job only required to have 1 site visit, and I only have manpower to do 1 site visit for that building, because other times the responsible person may have other things to do. But then in their request, they may say that they want you to attend some regular meetings at their site with their other parties on the carbon audit job. Are you going to take that? Are you not going to take that? That may happen in some of those scenarios, and you need to decide that without any more unofficial communication with the clients. So things can be difficult during this stage. And also the guideline and standard requirement. Sometimes, unfortunately, no matter how you encourage them to do things according to one standard, at the end, when they issue the tender notice or or the request for info quotation, you may find another standard listed to be listed on it together with another requirement on the professional to endorse the report. So things may go very different way, and you need to, in the 5 business days, you need to fix that. And in the request for quotation and tender notice stage, when you, in your reply, you also need to finalize your team, finalize what professional you are providing. You need to provide the, your potential customer the CV of the professional related, not a job hunting CV, but a CV for the consultancy, to prove that he or she is qualified to do the endorsement of the carbon audit report or other relevant jobs. And also the qualification certificate to make sure that the client believes that you have the professional to do the job. That's important. And of course, the pricing, or pricing proposal, depending on the complexity of the job. Well, so in the 5 days, you need to do all those mandates and overhead calculation and estimation. And you, of course, you hope that you are estimating it right. Otherwise, you will lose money. Your company will lose money, and they will say that you are doing a bad job managing the project. And depending on the carbon audit complexity, you may need extra equipment. You may also need external support if they are asking for more services. So you need to do all those calculations within, finalize those calculations within the 5 working days. So if you have before this stage, if you have talked to your client, then you may be able to buy a little bit more time to do this type of calculation, or you may have already provided them the budget, then you will have more time to do this calculation. Otherwise, you can only do it within these 5 days. And that because this is about pricing. So this includes your time to get permission from your company's business departments, their approval to issue the pricing, to issue the final price. So you can see that time is limited, time is valuable. So that's why I would say that this is one of the most exciting parts during the for a carbon audit project, even though the project hasn't been finalized yet. And finally, job references. For the clients, actually, this thing, carbon audit, even though the guideline is already 15 years old, it may still be new to them. They may not trust that you have the capability to do the job. Okay, they may not be able to trust that. So you need to convince them that you are good to go. So not just the professional qualification, but you also need to provide them a list of job references saying what type of jobs you have done previously, maybe not just on the type of the job, but also the size of the job as well, to prove to your clients that you are capable, your team is capable to do the job. Okay. So after compiling all those materials and getting approvals from different departments to prepare for the reply, you still have more things to do. Okay. So for the reply, as I mentioned, things are official, right? And you need to have a fair comparison. They need to have a fair comparison between your proposal and the proposals from your clients. So that's why they have standardized the format for the reply. So you have form of tender. You also have the payment terms, things on the request for quotation or the tender notice. And you need to look at those to make sure that you agree with them, or you need to change your pricing because of the way they are doing the payments. And for tender, it's even more serious. After putting everything together, you may need to put the replies in a sealed envelope and send it to the client, their physical address. You may need to find, not just by post, but you probably need to find some delivery service or do it yourself to make sure that it arrives at the office on time. to make sure that it arrives at the office on time. Just now I mentioned a lot of different procedures in the company, like pricing, approval from your business departments to make sure that things are good, or confirmation of the technical team that they are able to do the job. You have already spent a lot of time. You may not even have time to have a delivery service to send the tender reply back to their physical address. You may need to do it yourself. So yeah, if you recall in some of those news, right, when the project is really, really big, not just the carbon audit projects, but some of those land bidding projects, things like that, you may see a lot of reporters in the news in front of the tender box, and to take photos or take videos of those land developers' representatives to put their price or other proposals in the tender box. That's the same thing. That's the same thing. Even for carbon audits, you may see that you need to do tenders in this way. Do the do the reply to a tender notice by yourself, and right before the tender's deadline. Okay, so after all this work, and probably for small projects within 2 days, and for large projects maybe a month or so, you would, if your proposal is the best one among the competitors, you will see a reply from the client saying that you can start doing the project. And for example, this is just now I showed this to you and talk about the event carbon neutrality service, right? And this is the award notice saying that a public award notice. For large projects, you may see all the pricing details, the winner of the bid, everything else. I mean, for governments, you will see all of those on the government website. But most of the time, in other cases, the winner will be notified without informing all other bidders. So if you are bidding the project and you are not sure if you have won the job, you have waited for a long time, you may need to call the client to get the answer. And sometimes they may not want to reply you because they may be thinking that, oh, the winner may not be actually do the job. There's a risk over there. And in that case, they may need another team to do the job right away. So that's why in some cases, even though they have already awarded their job to a winner of the bid, if you are the loser, you unfortunately have lost the bid, and call them to ask for the final answer, they may not reply you in some scenarios. Yeah, that's confusing, but that's the reality. And after all that report compilation, tender reply compilation, and all those communication with the clients to finalize the job details, all those detailed job workflow in the 2 phases, we will finally see the beginning of a carbon audit project. We will finally see the beginning of the project. Okay, so I see that the time now is 7:50. So, right, yeah. So let's take a short break for 10 minutes, and then I will continue. Testing, all right. So, okay, let's get back to my presentation. But before I move on, first of all, are there any questions related to how a carbon audit project can begin? Are there any questions related to that? Or other things before the break? If not, then let's begin the project. So right now, after getting the award by the client and you can begin the project. So there are quite a few stages from the project management perspective. There are quite a few stages that you need to go through before you can deliver the carbon audit report, which will wrap up the technical part of the carbon audit project. So first, when the project begins, you need to send a request for information to a client to ask for some preliminary information that is related to a carbon audit for you to plan for the project. Well, of course, during the period stage, actually, you probably have already got the confirmation of the requested timeline of the project from your client. Having said that, they may not have given you all the technical information. Of course, the project hasn't begun yet. They may not entrust all the information to you after you were just bidding the project. So you need to ask for more information to do the things that will help you to do the calculation, things that will help you to explore that site, things that you will need to include in your carbon audit report. So that's why we have the request for information stage. And after getting the information, you need to do some desktop analysis to preliminarily determine what you will expect in the carbon audit report. So the initial desktop analysis. And after that, even though it's your client, even though it's your client that requests for this service, their team may not be fully aligned to you. They may not understand why they need the project. They may still be wondering if they will be paying too much for the project. So you need to confirm with them. You need to convince them that the project is valuable, and they can entrust you. They can trust you to do the project. You have a professional team, so you will have a kick-off meeting together with a site visit to the building to collect the information or things like photos or on-site inspection to make sure that things align with the request for information, to reconfirm those things at the first stage. And after collecting everything, hopefully, you will have a desktop analysis for initial drafting of the report. And then you will have the first draft, and you will send the first draft back to your client to see if they have any comments. Sometimes even if you have found a really good carbon emission reduction opportunity, if you have written in a style that they don't like, it may expose somebody's fault. They may want to iterate back saying that, hey, let's tone it down, and in some cases, in more serious cases, they may say that, oh, sorry, I forgot to send you this piece of information, no matter you have written such things in the report. Then you may need to recalculate the whole thing. So iteration with the report. And finally, finalization of the report to wrap up the project. Okay, so the request for information stage. Oh, maybe I will move back first. So for the request for information stage, before I move on, actually I should ask, what can any one of you tell me what you're going to ask the client for in order to do the carbon audit? Well, the calculation part. Can anyone tell me maybe one piece of information at this stage that you need to ask from your client such that that is critical for the carbon audit calculation? One thing? Any one of you? I know that this part of the audience was talking when I began, so you must have some thing to say, right? Anyone over here? Yes? Anything that you need to ask from the client for the carbon audit calculation? How about the gentleman over here? No? Okay, let's have the answer. So before doing any calculation, actually, you need to define the operating boundary, right, of the carbon audit project. Of course, for the reporting period, it would be defined in the technical specification in the quotation stage. So it's probably 1 year or 2 years long, something like that, with 2 separate years of calculation, things like that. But you need to define the operating boundary of the building. So you definitely need some drawings and also the 4 areas of the building, the type of building, the age of building, things like that, for you to realize, hey, what are we going to look for when we look up a carbon emission reduction opportunity? So for some of those very old buildings, they may have very old equipment. So you may want to suggest some, for example, energy efficient equipment. Whereas for new buildings, they may be almost perfect according to some green building standards. And you may need to focus on if they are following those standards to operate their buildings. So yeah, the age is important as well. And most of the important part is the physical boundary. And sometimes they may have some locations that are not owned by the building owners or are not owned by our clients, such that they will have no information in that area. And you need to know where they are, and you need to exclude that from your carbon audit. Now, it's not just about inclusion, it's about exclusion as well. In some projects, they may have locations that are going to be excluded. So you need to be aware of that. And especially when you are going to do the site visit, you need to know which part you need to skip to save time and to be more efficient, commercially speaking. And of course, you need to ask for extra data. You know what the reporting period is, right, for the carbon audit, and you need to ask for all the building data during that period in order to do the calculation, like the amount of greenhouse gas emission as a result of the electricity purchased from the utility grid. You need to know all those. So you need to ask for calculation inputs like energy and water bills during that period, vehicle fuel consumption, paper procurement records, paper waste records, things like that. And and also the building drawings as well. I mentioned that, right? But the other important part is that I have set the site visit, right? And you want to plan for an efficient, not just an efficient site visit route that you would be able to find carbon emission reduction opportunities. That you say there are places where you can take pictures for your carbon audit report to make it look fancier. For example, yeah, you need that for your clients, right? So they are not really technical. You need to have something to be eye-catching in your report. So photo taking opportunities or carbon emission reduction opportunities or things that you need to confirm. For example, they may have emphasized some of the places that I'm not so sure if they are owned by me, or you need to ask the other department for that, things like that. Then you definitely need to include that part in your investigation. So you need to have the drawings to know which are those parts. And sometimes they may give contradictory information, unfortunately. So verbally, they may say that, oh, we don't need that part, but then in your drawing, you may find that it's a really significant part that would be giving a lot of greenhouse gases. For example, a boiler run by diesel. They may say that, oh, our heating system, I'm not so sure what they are. And then you find a diesel boiler room in the drawings. Okay, you definitely should look at that when you are doing the site visit. So that's why drawings are important as well. And finally, if they have any previous carbon audit reports, it's better to look at them because you want, for carbon audits, for example, for unlisted companies, which are publishing carbon audit reports every year, you want your accounting methods to align with them. So say, for example, if they have reported any scope 3 emissions, like the one that I have shown, that will be also related to your carbon audit projects, you definitely need to include that. So that's why you want to align with the previous reports, and you want the previous reports from them to do your project. But sometimes your clients may think that, oh yeah, it's better to keep the previous report to us to see if the guy is doing the right thing. Even if they have the report, sometimes they are not giving it to you, saying that they have lost it. I have seen clients like that. So be warned. Sometimes during this stage, they may not be giving you the correct information, and you need to be adaptive. And here is a list of example items that you need to include in your request for information to get data from your client for the carbon audit report. For example, under Scope 1 emission, you will need to have fossil fuel procurement records. Like, say, for example, if they have the diesel boiler, they, unlike the can gas bills or things like that, they are buying cans of diesels like every 2 days or every month or so, or every 2 months. So they only have the procurement records, but not like the consumption records also. They don't have a meter for the diesel. They only have the procurement records. So you need to ask for that. And say, for example, for the emergency generator in the buildings. Emergency generators in the buildings, they honestly don't have a consumption record of the diesels in the emergency generator room. So you can only estimate how much diesel they have used in the procurement records. So procurement records at this stage actually is important. They are important. And also time gas consumption bills, of course, yeah, is fossil fuel. You need to include that. Vehicle fuel procurement records. Again, in vehicles, they don't have a real-time meter on them. So most of the time, the buildings for the vehicles they own, they only have the procurement records of the fuel. They don't have the exact amount of fuel being used in the vehicles. You need to have that as well. Refrigerant procurement and relevant recycling records. All of you probably have learned that refrigerants inside air conditioning systems. They are a type of greenhouse gas. Okay, so and their release to the atmosphere is a direct emission under Scope 1. So if you have refrigerant procurement and relevant recycling records from the client, you need to get that as well. For the recycling records, oh yeah, right. That's one example. They may not have it immediate. If you ask for it, they may not have it. But if you ask, hey, do you have air conditioning equipment retrofit projects? Yes, I have it. So is it split system chillers that you need to disassemble? Oh yeah, right. Okay, do you have you asked your contractors to recycle the refrigerant to make sure they are not being released in the atmosphere when you disassemble the equipment? Oh yeah, now I remember. I will check. Yeah, you may need to go through this type of communication before you can realize that they have a relevant recycling record. So yeah, things are not straightforward at this stage. If you just put it there, they will say that they have none. You need to ask repeated questions to lead them to the answers. And also tree plantation records for direct removal of carbon from the atmosphere. Oh, for this part, by the way, right now, for some of those buildings like campus buildings or schools, they will have tree assessment records to make sure that the trees are not collapsing, they're healthy, things like that. That's the report that you want to get when you are asking for the tree plantation records from buildings. And under Scope 2 emission, you have time gas consumption, electricity consumption bills. It's straightforward, right? Right? Scope 2? Okay? You remember what Scope 2 is, right? Scope 2 emission. Can you recall what Scope 2 emissions are? Right, exactly. Indirect emission due to purchased energy. Yeah, remember purchased energy, okay? And finally, Scope 3, under this guideline, the government guideline, we only need to calculate this Scope 3 emission due to water use, waste, and also due to water use and paper decomposition in the landfill, okay? So those paper procurement records, paper inventory records, waste paper disposal records, and also water consumption bills are the ones that you need. Having said that, in Hong Kong, most offices and buildings, they don't really have a paper inventory records. So they don't have the record for the beginning of the paper inventory, not the end. They only have the procurement records and also the recycling records. So that's why most of the time we can only calculate the paper waste sent to the landfill based on those two records, paper procurement records and also the recycling records. We don't have, even though under the guideline we need to find paper inventory records, but in reality, even from government buildings, we don't have it. So yeah, that's one of the reality check. The guideline theoretically asks you to include paper inventory records from the buildings to do the calculation, but in reality, you can never find. Okay. Well, just now I have listed all the most of the information that you need to have in the request for information, but that's not the end of the story at this stage. Instead of just asking for the physical boundary, for carbon auditors, actually what they need to do is to confirm the physical boundary. Because they may have, as I mentioned, they may have contradictory information. So on one hand, they may say that, our building, for example, for schools, our building, well, we only have one school hall and also some classrooms. Oh yeah, but according to your drawings and also the tree plantation as assessment records, you are asking your contractors to check the health of the trees on the opposite side of the street. Should I include that? Do you own the land, the piece of land on the other side of the street? Is it also part of the building? Yeah, you may have encountered things like that, or other things like they have tenants in the building. So, for example, in some of the schools that I have gone to and for carbon audit projects, they have canteens, they have kitchens, and you need to verify if the kitchen is being rented by other parties or if they are paying for the town gas and electricity use by the restaurant service providers at the canteen. Those two will determine if the restaurant or the canteen is to be included in the carbon audit. So tenant areas and also government department areas, does your client want to include the area from the other government departments in the building? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, depending on who's in charge of the whole building. So it's tricky. You definitely need to confirm that. Vehicle ownership, if they have vehicle operation with fossil fuel consumption, do they have the records? And do they own the records? Are they paying for the bills or not? Should I include that? Position of the trees, just now I mentioned that. Yeah, trees around the buildings. Which of the trees are planted within the control of the owner and which is not? And if the piece of land is registered under this building or as another building, you need to clarify that as well. And of course, sometimes there are other extra things. If you, in the drawings, you have found electrical vehicle chargers that are being metered separately for other users, non-building users. You may need to clarify if that electricity bill is being paid by the building owner or is being paid by the others, such that to decide if you need to include that indirect emission of purchased energy use as a Scope 2 emission in the carbon audit report. That's also tricky as well. And after getting all those information, you can start to do some initial analysis, like the amount of preliminary calculating the amount of carbon being emitted by the building, and also compare it to other benchmarks, and also look at the trends to see if there are extra things that you pay attention to in the upcoming take-off meeting or site visit. For example, do the data match? yeah, for example, I've seen one case. It's a supermarket. They have two large chillers helping the supermarket to cool down and to refrigerate their food. But then they have an electricity bill, which is too small for the chillers. Yeah, they just have one electricity bill, and it's too small for the chillers, let alone for all the other electricity consumption in the supermarket. So, at the end of the day, no matter how we ask for the information, the supermarket can only feedback that electricity bill and no more. So, we can't write it inside the report, but we are quite sure that yeah, the supermarket is a tenant in the building. So the building owner instead of the supermarket is the building management that is paying for the electricity use of the chillers. The supermarket is paying nothing for it. So yeah, there are things happening like that way, and you definitely need to look at the data to see if things have gone wrong, and you need some extra clarification from the building owner or from your client. And also, in order to do that, the first thing you need to do is to compare, after getting the energy use bills, to look at the EUI, energy utilization index. Compare the energy use per area in a year relative to the type of building under the EMSD benchmarks on energy utilization indexes for different types of building. You can see on the right-hand side, the energy use index for commercial buildings is on the EMSD website. You can compare the energy use EUI of that building with the ones in this table and see if it's high or low. If it's too low, maybe they are not giving enough information. They are missing something. You need to ask for that. If it's way beyond that, that means that they have a lot of carbon emission reduction opportunities, and you may need to pay extra attention during the site visit to identify the opportunities. Or you need to look at the drawings more carefully to see if they have any redundant operation, redundant energy use, things like that. And for tree records, you need to have not just the tree record this year, but the previous years as well, to make sure that if you can identify any new trees, only new trees are to be included in a carbon audit report, not the old trees. Because in Hong Kong, we are calculating the tree carbon removal according to the total amount of carbon to be removed by that particular tree during its life cycle. So even though we have annual reporting, but for each tree we'll only calculate it once, and that's it. In all other future carbon audit reports, it no longer calculate that. So you need to pay attention to that as well. And for procurement records, we need to make sure that it's comprehensive. If something is missing, it's off, like, well, maybe, say for example, where is the paper procurement records in June and in May? We have all the other months, but not the ones in May. You may want to double check with the client. Yeah, they usually miss a lot of things. So, and also the disposal record and recycling record as well. Say for example, if they have disassembled split systems, split air conditioning systems, and they definitely need to have a recycling record to prove that their refrigerants are not being emitted to the atmosphere. Oh, yeah, I've seen one case. They have changed, retrofit all of their split systems, split air conditioners, to reduce carbon emission under a funding scheme. But when I asked them if they have any refrigerant recycling practices, they said they have none. I'm not so sure how much refrigerant they have emitted to the atmosphere because of the retrofit. And after identifying all those suspicious things and have a list of questions and discussion agenda and also the site visiting route that you would go through at the building, then you can finally have the kick-off meeting and the site visit to explain to your clients why your team is good, and if you have some follow-up questions that you can only ask during Testing, testing. Okay, testing. All right. So, yeah, as I mentioned, well, your client, well, he or she may miss a lot of things, and that's obvious because he or she is not a expert in carbon auditing. It's not an expert in low carbon operation or whatever. So there are things that you can't really ask for very clearly during in phone conversations or in emails. They may still be unable to provide everything according to the request for information before a kickoff meeting. So during the kickoff meeting, in addition to convincing their team that we are good, we also need to ask follow-up questions slightly to get all the information for the carbon audit, okay? So during the kickoff meeting, we introduce the team, we explain why the project is significant, and explain the project schedule, tell them when they can expect to have the carbon audit report, and usually it should follow the contract, otherwise, yeah, it's going to be chaos. And you also want to identify, not just that, but in addition to asking for follow-up questions for the request for information, you want to, at that time, know exactly what the motivation is for the client to do the carbon audit. Because what it matters is that it will affect what they want in the carbon audit report. So if they have an motivation, something like, well, of course, they have written it, they will probably have told you during the communication stage or during the tender notice stage, but you want to reconfirm that. You want to reconfirm that. Sometimes you can only see their top level management during the carbon audit kick-off meeting, and they will tell you the real reason behind, the upper management reason for doing the carbon audit, and you know what you need to include inside a carbon audit report. And of course, if you are at the site, at the building for a kick-off meeting, you want to have the site visit as well with the photos and finding recommendations to reduce the carbon emission and put them in the carbon audit report. And yeah, of course, there are lots of things that you can suggest to reduce carbon emission. And just now in the beginning, I have said that, excuse me, I have said that you should include some common, there are some, you need to include recommendations in carbon audit report. Carbon audit report is not just about quantifying carbon emission, right? It's also about recommending how to reduce carbon emission in the future for the building. So you need to have some recommendations, and there are quite a few different types of recommendations. I will separate them as building surfaces related and non-building surfaces related. And a lot of building surfaces engineer will focus on the building surfaces related part, but in my own opinion, I think that there are lots of non-building surface related opportunities as well. So let me first go through the building surfaces related part. So if you look at the EMSD Code of Practice for Energy Efficiency of Building Surfaces Installation, there are lots of recommendations to reduce the building energy consumption. And as I said, building energy consumption is the major part of Hong Kong's carbon emission. So that's why this is important to reduce the carbon emission in Hong Kong. And you can recommend things like LED lighting. Well, if you find some old traditional fluorescent lighting tubes or even some metal halide lamps in the building, then you can recommend that. And the other one is the energy efficiency labeled equipment. Sometimes they may have used, well, right now you can see a lot of energy efficiency labels actually. One's from mainland China, one's from Europe, one's from the US, in all different types of equipment in Hong Kong. But sometimes you may find something that have none of those. Then, yep, you can suggest them to retrofit that. And also high air temperature set point. So if you know that in Hong Kong, we sometimes like to have very cold indoors, right, to make you feel comfortable. But that costs a lot of energy. So for each degree of for each low degree of Celsius that you have lowered at your thermostat, you may be suggesting a 3% up of energy use of the air conditioning equipment according to an EMSD study. So you want to suggest a high air temperature set point and a building load for different things like ventilation may go up and down depending on the occupancy. So you may want to suggest variable speed driven motors for the fans and pumps. And of course, there are other suggestions, engineering suggestions following the code of practice for energy efficiency of building surfaces installation. And you can, depending on what you find in the site visit, you may suggest those as well. Oh, by the way, not just suggestion, but in a carbon audit report, after all, this is a report to be issued to a client. You want to appreciate the effort to reduce carbon emission. So if they have already done that, instead of suggesting it as a recommendation, you should have a session saying that you have existing carbon emission reduction recommendations that you have already implemented. You need to, in the carbon audit report, you need to appreciate what your client has done, not just for appreciation, but also if you follow, you want to reconfirm to the public, to the clients that they are really implementing carbon emission reduction measures. They are really implementing it. You need to confirm that as well in carbon audit reports. So you want to include the recommendations that they have already implemented inside the report, saying that they have already done it or they are doing it. You need to do that too. Okay, how about long building surface equipment related ones? Well, of course, on the top is still building surface related ones. So instead of just asking for retrofit, you can ask for some special practices like retro commissioning and behavioral change as well, like switching off the equipment during when they are not in use mandatorily, or during low occupancy hour as well. Even though it's still occupied, you try to switch off the things to let people know that, hey, you shouldn't occupy the space for high energy consumption, you should go. That's behavioral change. And also, you may want to try to ask your client to avoid any building fossil fuel usage. So for example, like what I said, diesel boilers. Yeah, right now we have in Hong Kong, we don't have a very cold climate, so definitely heat pump water heaters, or at least heat pump water heaters or some other heating devices, they are definitely more carbon friendly, I would say this way, than fossil fuels. So you want to avoid as much fossil fuel usage as you can in buildings. In Hong Kong, we probably don't need that right now. Yeah, if if your building is in a very cold climate, like in the Arctic Circle, then heat pumps may not work really well because of the defrost requirements. So you may still need to use fossil fuels to support the heating, space heating in those buildings. But in Hong Kong, we don't. And also for refrigerators, coolers, and freezers, if they have poor insulation, they have poor sealing at the doors, even though it's not building surfaces related, you can suggest that as well, because any leakages from those of cold air from those freezers implies extra electricity consumption and extra carbon emission. So you can suggest that as well. So most of the time, what I would do is to have to carry an infrared camera, take a photo of the cooler, walk-in freezers, and see if the sealing, if you have really, really low temperature, a temperature that is close to the air temperature inside the refrigerator around the refrigerator doors. If they do, that means that it's leaking. And also in restaurants, yeah, especially Chinese restaurants, or yeah, actually Western restaurants as well, they like to preheat their cookers and ovens. What I mean by preheating, yeah, like in buildings, we also do pre-cooling, right? 1 hour pre-cooling before we operate we have people coming in the classroom or coming into the offices to make sure the place is cool enough. But traditional practices in some restaurants, they will preheat their ovens or cookers for 3 hours before they really use it. 3 hours. And that's a lot of time gas redundant use. You want to suggest that them not to use it. And similarly for water heaters as well, resistance water heaters, they are all the restaurants, the ones that you try to pour water into the Chinese restaurants that you try to pour hot water for your tea. Each of them are weighted at 10 kilowatt, way more than your air conditioner at home. So you want, if they are preheating them all the time, you want to suggest them to switching on, not in the last minute, but maybe just 1 hour before they start serving the environment. Computer monitors as well, try to put them in sleep mode. Well, you may not be aware of it, but for routers or MIDI computers, the main body itself, they may just cause, when they are operating, they may just cause like 10 watts of power. But for computer monitors, the laptops over there, they may cause 30 to 40 watts. So that's why you may want to put them into sleep mode to save energy when you are not using them. Also, for vehicle types, if they are using some old vehicles like Euro 1 or 2 or 3, you may suggest them to use Euro 6, and also biodiesel, use biodiesel to reduce carbon emission, or to electrify the vehicles like what people usually do in Shenzhen. And finally, if you are suggesting a retrofit of air conditioners for more energy efficient model, make sure you suggest them to recover the refrigerant as well. Yeah, otherwise it's going to, yeah, they will be releasing more carbon than what they want. Okay, so after identifying all those suggestions, oh yeah, by the way, usually people would like to have photos for the suggestions. So make sure that for each of the recommendation in a real report and also existing recommendation, have a photo for it. So that's why you need to go to do site visit. And after that, you can draft your report following this format. So you can see there are quite a lot of things over there, but this is actually an ordinary organization of building inspection report. So it's not just about carbon audits, but also if you are doing building surfaces inspections or other types of building structure inspections, the format of the organization of the report is similar, starting from the report revision, disclaimer, and endorsement. Make sure that the report is being endorsed. Make sure that you have good records of the revision of the reports in the beginning, and followed by executive summary that is going to be read by not just your clients, but also your clients' upper management. Yeah, they don't have time to read the whole thing, so they will just read the executive summary. So make sure you have summarized their carbon emission in that reporting year, and also the major recommendations as well in the executive summary. And then after that, the detailed reporting of the carbon audits, project findings, starting from the building background, methodology, results and discussion, and recommendation. And of course, you need to have all those project period, reporting period, photos, physical boundaries, methods, standards, etc. being written inside the report. Hey, Howard, the client already know what they are doing, right? But you need to reconfirm with them what you have done. And after several years, the others in that client's company would read the report and see what you have done as well. So all those repeated things, you still need to write them in the report to reconfirm it for your clients. And of course, the calculation, the results and trends, benchmarking, and the targets, like EUI targets or the carbon neutrality targets of the company, of your client, you need to put them in as well. And finally, you have the conclusion and appendix of calculation tables from the paper approach Excel file. And for the paper approach Excel file, I should have downloaded it as well. So this is a government website for the that introduces the carbon audit, and you can find the guideline to account for and report on the greenhouse gas emission over here. And not just that, but there is also an Excel template for paper approach carbon audit. And if you put it here, if you open it, you can find all those calculations related to the carbon emission, stuff like that, right over here. Of course, the detail, and we need to put all the numbers in there, and then put these tables as appendices of the report to prove that we have followed the method to do the calculation, to do all the calculation. And having said that, this is not a wild card for everything. So, for example, the global warming potential of the refrigerant and other carbon emission data, especially for the fossil fuel, is not as up to date as the most recent IPCC AR6 report. So, if you are following the other carbon audit standards to do your carbon audit, then you can use this one. But some of those things, it would definitely be useful. For example, the emission factors for the indirect emission factors for tank gas procurement. It may be hard to really find that emission factor from the annual reports of the tank gas company and also the electricity utility companies. And so whenever you try to do the calculation, you find the most up-to-date one inside this Excel file, and they will update this regularly to make sure that you have the most up-to-date emission factor in these files. So yeah, when you are following the Hong Kong government guideline to do carbon audit, you definitely need this carbon audit template. You need to include that to show that in your report, to show that you are using the emission factors and global warming potentials to do the calculation. And of course, on that website, there are also other recommendations for carbon emission reduction for different types of buildings, and you can look it up yourself later. Okay, having said that, after writing the whole report, then sometimes they may finally realize what you were saying in the beginning. They will realize that you have missed an important part of the building because they have misinterpreted. Of course, the client will say that it's your fault and you need to take it. So if they have really missed a building area that you need to include, then you need to include it right now, unfortunately. Yeah, sometimes they only realize that after, no matter how you repeatedly ask for that question, they will just ask that question, they will just say it's okay, until they have read the report. Then they will know, and they will ask you to redo the whole calculation to include the extra parts. And and sometimes there may be some confidentiality issues, like for example in banned buildings, especially the investment floors and also the client floors in the headquarters, they don't allow any photos actually. Your photos should not include any person, any people. It should not include any computer screens, and it should not include any any bank documents for their confidentiality stuff. So when you take photos inside, you need to ask the facility managers first, and you need to make sure that your photos only include the energy consumption part. Or sometimes in those reports, you may be able to skip the photo part because they really don't allow you to take any of those photos. And sometimes the client will finally get their previous report out and try to compare them for inconsistency. And at that moment, you need to resolve the inconsistency as well if they only disclose that part right at that point. And of course, at this stage, when they are reading the first draft, they may try to ask for additional services like retrofit recommendations also. Of course, within the service scope, you can tell what they can do, but if it's outside the carbon audit scope or the outside the service scope that you are providing, then you need to gracefully refuse them or tell them that it's another service that they need to send another request for quotation to ask for. But sometimes it's just some simple recommendation, simple operation change like, hey, are you sure that it's okay to switch off those lightings at that time? Then if you have some other project references, that have successfully switched off the lighting without disturbing the occupants, then you can tell them to like kind of strengthen their answers to their management to really execute those recommendations. Okay, then after all those iterations, then you can finally deliver the final report. And so things end, right? It's good. We are good. Are there anything else that you think you need to follow up when you submit the final report and people accept it? Do you think that that's the end of the story? Do you remember all those motivations that I've talked about for carbon audits, like BEAM plus certificates, or Hong Kong Stock Exchange requirements? Sometimes, actually, for your client's direct contact, again, as I mentioned, they are not experts in this area, and they are not sure if the report is okay. So sometimes they may need to wait for their top management's approval. So it may be like something like a month or so. And sometimes they may need to wait to make sure that your report is okay for the certification effort, for the BEAM Plus submission. And those things may take 3 months to 6 months. And sometimes they may need to have verification from the other departments to make sure that, hey, the ESG report is good for publication. And it will depend on when they do the carbon audit relative to their ESG report publication. So it's not the end of the story. You may think that you have already ended the project, but maybe 2 months later, all of a sudden, they may call you back saying that you need to fix something inside. And of course, before that happens, they will withhold the last payment of the project. So business, commercial-wise, it's not the end of the story. And in some cases, they may have included a 12-month defect liability period, a 12-month warranty period in the project, in the report as well, in the contract as well. So during that 12 months, if they find any defect in your report, like wrong calculation, inconsistency with the next report, they may come back and ask you to fix it. So submitting the final report is not the end of the story. You may still need to wait for a few more months before you can really wrap up the whole project. Even if the whole thing that you have gone through just now, it have only taken a month long. It may take a few more months for approvals on your client side before you can really wrap up the project. Oh, by the way, for some building owners out there, they may only pay their first dollar, or what they will have in their payment terms. They will have set 100% payment after satisfaction of the report. So you have spent a month of work to do the report. You have spent like maybe like 3 weeks or even longer period to communicate with the client before you can get to the request for information stage. But you still need to wait for like 1 to 3 months before you get your payments for the project. So yeah, if you talk about the real business procedures, you really don't have the money for the work until like a few months after the completion of the work. It can happen like that. Yep. Well, okay, so the question is about who are the third-party verifiers of your reports and if they are your competitors. That's a good question. So you're right. So for sometimes they may in the in the work of the carbon audit, you may need to wait for the third-party verify. You may need to even include that part to liaison with the third-party verifier to complete the report before you can wrap up the whole project. It can happen like that for carbon audits, especially for company-based carbon audits, not building-based ones, because they need to publish it in their ESG reports. Yeah, and they can be your competitors because they have the abilities to do carbon audits. Having said that, they would have a different set of qualifications to do a third-party verification. So for carbon auditors, they have qualification related to the people. But for an institute to be trusted enough to do third-party audits, the institute itself, most of them are commercial institutes other than the HKQAA, so I can't really mention the others right now. But they can be your competitors. But having said that, because the guideline itself or the carbon audit practices in general, actually most people know, technically won't know what they are. And your third-party auditors, third-party verifiers will not know the price of your bid. So unless it's like those government open tender bids out there that need to be disclosed to everyone else, most of the time the presence of a third-party verifier won't affect your competitiveness for the project. And to be a verifier, actually, you can't be the carbon auditor for that project. So if your competitor want to be the verifier of certain carbon audit projects, they can't be the carbon auditors for that project themselves. They need to wait, or they need to bid for the verification job instead of the carbon audit job. So for that particular project, they can't compete for it, normally speaking. Having said that, in some other areas of auditing, like business accountants, you are right that the verifier and also the auditor can come from the same company as far as they are from the different teams. So you can see those big accounting firms, they may have different teams. One team would go for the audit job, and the other one will try to bid for the verification job. But for those scenarios, according to some other standards, they should have some firewalls in between those teams such that they are not communicating with each other, and they have other auditors to verify that each year, like the banks. So, so officially speaking, it should still be a fair bid. Yeah, but to be honest, I come from the engineering consultancy background. We don't have that kind of practice. So if we are doing the verification job, we can't do the audit job. And the vice versa. If we are doing the audit job, then we can't be for the verification job. Yeah, it's not. We are not similar to those business accounting guys. Yeah. We treat them, even if we have separate auditors in our field. We have separate auditors to say that we have firewalls in between the teams. We still consider that as conflict of interest. We can't do that for most of the engineering consultancy jobs or other related technology third-party auditors. We don't do that. We don't do it like the business accounting firms that do. Okay, any other questions? If not, then let's look at some emerging trends. Just like I have talked about the practice of a guideline which is 15 years old, and you can see for a technology standard, it's old. And especially when we are talking about carbon neutrality, we are talking about rapid changes for to lower the carbon emission. So a standard like that, even though Hong Kong uses buildings in Hong Kong, we use them a lot, but then a lot of buildings, because they are owned by multinationals, and they are subjected to other carbon neutrality targets following other carbon emission standards. So some buildings would opt for using another carbon audit standards to do their carbon audits, or sometimes they would just do 2 carbon audits. One according to the standard in Hong Kong, and the other one are following other standards because of different requirements. There are requirements from the multinational headquarters and the requirements in Hong Kong. So for the emerging businesses, the emerging trends, I will talk about 3 things. The first one, well, actually is emerging, but we have already done it for a few years already. It's carbon accounting for companies in addition to buildings. The other one is building energy audits with carbon audits. We used to do that before when that guideline just happened, but then we opt for doing them separately because of the different frequency requirements, but then we are combining them again. And then finally, the carbon neutrality services that more and more people would choose to do. So first of all, carbon accounting for companies instead of buildings. When I talk just now, I said that when we do carbon audits for companies, we need to do it for buildings. But then, if you are doing a carbon audit for a company with like a bank with 200 branches or 100 branches, to be honest, you can't visit each of those branches. It's impossible. So in that scenario, you may just visit some of the branches and try to have the physical boundaries defined big enough such that other unvisited places, their carbon emission won't affect the won't affect your carbon audit too much, other carbon audit reporting too much, and you will be good to go. So sometimes we'll just do carbon accounting for at the company level and get done with it. We skip the carbon audit for individual buildings. We just use the same practice for all the buildings together at the same time, and combining everything together. And of course, of course, we need to follow other standards as well. And then we call it a day. So the reason is that actually Hong Kong Stock Exchange, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, or sometimes you may have heard the term SBTI, Science-Based Target Initiatives, they really only need carbon audits for companies. They don't need carbon audits for individual buildings. So some of those companies would ask you to skip that. That is not visiting every branches or every small offices. Just look at those big ones, sample those big significant carbon emission sources, inspect them, and then write the carbon audit report. And of course, this will make the whole project more cost effective because you are not visiting every site. You are just visiting the major ones and then call it a day, even though you may miss some of those major things, some of those minor things in some of those specific branches. But overall speaking, for the companies, it will benefit them. But it doesn't mean that there are less workload. There is less workload for this type of jobs because when you are doing company level carbon accounting, unlike buildings, right? Buildings, we only have 3 or 4 scope 3 emissions or 2 scope 3 emissions. For carbon accounting for companies, their focus is shifting towards supply chain management. Supply chain management. So what it means is that instead of looking at just the assets, the building spaces owned by the companies, and then look at their resulting carbon emissions, we look at the carbon emission as a result of their suppliers and the users of your client services. So in scope 3 emissions, you may have heard of the things like business travels, you may have heard of the things like employee commuting, you may have heard of the things like carbon emission due to the purchased goods and services, or downstream leased assets, or even financed emission. That is the carbon emission due to the investment of banks and financial institutes. Those things are going to be the focus of carbon accounting for companies. So instead of looking at the building environment, for those projects, we are going to look at much more procurement records to do all those, or investment records to do all those accountings, to do all those calculations. And this is the example. This shows a little bit more illustrate a little bit more things about why we need to do that. Because if you look at, for example, for energy, for power plants, in the diagram on the left, if we look at power industry, most of the emissions are related to scope 1 and scope 1 and 2. There are not much scope 3 emissions, so we don't really need to look at supply chain because most of the carbon emission comes from their own buildings, their manufacturing plants, their power generation plants. So yeah, just use the carbon accounting standards for buildings, and you will capture most of the carbon emission. But if you look at things like automotives or mortgages, things like that, you will find that there are more and more long scope 1 emissions, or even long scope 2 emissions that you need to, that's actually are the carbon emissions of those industries, especially for banks. Actually, like more than, I haven't shown it here, but more than 80% of those carbon emission of banks, actually they are related to the finance emission of those companies. So those things will become the focus of the carbon accounting of those companies in the future. And looking at the buildings is not sufficient to account for that. You need to look at the procurement records and the carbon emission of their suppliers, and also their service users, in order to know exactly what their carbon emission should be. I mean, not just the carbon emission they are emitting, but the carbon emission that they have driven in other parts of the world. That's the carbon accounting for companies, the focus of the carbon accounting for companies. And here's one example. If that diagram is not sufficient enough, this is a carbon emission report of a consultancy company in the building industry, a consultancy company. And you can see for a consultancy company, their operation is mainly related to desktop analysis, right? Things that are happening inside the offices. So you won't see a lot of scope 1 and 2 emissions relative to other power generation companies. But if you look at their scope 3 emissions, especially the business travel emissions, the ones related to how often they fly around the world, because this company is a multinational company, they have a lot of business travel to connect not only their to connect their offices, the staff in their offices, but in different parts of the world, but also the clients. They have a lot of business travel emissions. You can see that the business travel emissions, the one related to how much they fly, yeah, it's way higher than their scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So yeah, it's an important emission for them to report, and it definitely won't be covered if you just look at the carbon accounting for the buildings. And for these scope 3 emissions, even though that is not that accurate, but more and more people choose to do monetary-based carbon accounting. So instead of looking at the actual activity data, like the one that you probably have gone through most of the time, the electricity use, the diesel fuel use, we look at the amount of carbon emission following each of the dollars you spend. So for example, if you look at the carbon emission database XCO base 3.8.2, for example, you may find an emission factor related to the use of construction work surface in Europe. And we are talking about 0.2 kilogram of CO2 equivalent per euro dollar spent. So what it means is that if you are paying for some construction work surface, for each euros you spend in Europe, you are emitting 0.2 kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent. Of course, this is not as accurate as the emission that you calculate based on the physical activity data according to ISO 14064 or other standards. If you have physical activity data, then you should use them to calculate the carbon emission, not the monetary ones, because these ones they are calculated with delays of we are talking about 2 to 3 years actually. So it's even less accurate. But when we are talking about scope 3 emissions, when we are talking about suppliers who are not willing or have no obligations to provide physical activity data to you to do the carbon audits, this is the way to go, to look at the procurement data to estimate the amount of carbon emission as a result of the use of their services. So that would be the coming focus for carbon accounting for companies, which will focus on supply chain carbon emission and also finance the emission. And the other thing that would be related to the emerging trends is the combination of building energy audits and carbon audits again. So in the past, when we first have carbon audits, we also have the mandatory provision for energy audits in every 10 years. So even the EMSD issues tender notices for carbon and energy audits together at the same time for some of their buildings, just to because most of the time the things that you are going to recommend, like energy efficiency recommendations, they are the same. So you don't need to have 2 separate teams to do that. But then during that time, we still need to do for some of those entities, they need to do carbon audits every year, as I mentioned. But for building energy audits, we are still talking about a 10-year cycle. So, so that's why they were being separated. But right now, we are speeding up energy audit frequency in 5 years, in a cycle of 5 years. So we are speeding that up, and because of that, some of those people are combining them again. And we are not just talking about standards in Hong Kong, like in the ASHRAE standard for commercial building energy audits. They have some motivation for decarbonization as well, and they have a separate carbon audit requirement under their energy audit standards. So more and more people are doing energy audits and carbon audits together at the same time. For example, for some of those multinationals, they are required by their headquarters to do ASHRAE energy audits. And then they will do the carbon audits with energy audits at the same time as well. And finally, carbon neutrality services. There was a new standard called ISO 14068, which 2023, which talk about how you can plan for carbon neutrality in the future, like in 2050. And they are not just talking about the plan, but also defining what it means by residual emission, which means that there are emissions that you cannot reduce at the end. So yeah, there are more and more surveys trying to estimate that and say what you need to do, what special measures you need to run if your residual emission is too large following your carbon neutrality targets. So these 3 things, carbon neutrality services, building energy audit with carbon audits, and also carbon accounting for companies are the emerging trends that we are seeing in the industry in Hong Kong. Okay, to summarize, today we have gone through the initiatives in Hong Kong industry on why we need carbon audits in buildings in Hong Kong. And we have also gone through not just the technical parts, but also the other project management procedures on how we are engaging 2 different parties to do carbon audits. And we have also mentioned some emerging trends in Hong Kong on what we are going to see next in the industry in terms of carbon audits. Okay, so I think the time is almost up, and let's stop here. Sorry, it takes a little bit more longer than what I expected, and thank you for your attention.
Yeah, so I think it's great to have some vision from the carbon auditor from a real business. So maybe in our lecture, we just learn from the theory, and then now we hear from the view of a real carbon auditor, and then it's great for hearing from Howard's sharing about a practical job about carbon audit. Okay, so I think that's it for today. And then please be reminded that next week there will be a test. And I think we may start the test at around 8 o'clock, okay? And after you have finished the test, you may just leave, okay? So you will be given 1.5 hours, and quicker you finish the test, earlier you can leave, all right? So that's it, and I will see you next week.